The night my own son told me I was too much trouble still cuts deeper than any storm ever could. I had lost my home to the tornado only hours before, but hearing those words in his pristine living room shattered me in a way no wind could. The woman who had worked double shifts to pay his tuition, who had held him through every fever and heartbreak, was now unwelcome under his roof. That betrayal burned so fiercely, it left me trembling in silence, clutching nothing but a bag of ruined clothes and a silver hair clip I'd kept since I was 17. I hadn't known it yet, but that moment of rejection, being cast aside by my own flesh and blood, would open a door I thought had closed forever. To explain how I got there, I need to start at the beginning. My name is Elaine Porter. I am 66 years old, a widow who thought she had already endured the hardest blows life could deliver. That belief shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in Emporia when the sky turned a sickly green-black. The sirens wailed, shrill and unrelenting, and I rushed into the storm cellar, clutching the old shirt of my late husband as if the fabric could still protect me. Above me, the roar built like a freight train tearing the earth apart, and then a deafening crash rattled the walls until the ground itself trembled. When the silence came, it was worse than the noise. I climbed the steps, my knees weak, and stepped into a wasteland. The house I had lived in for 42 years was nothing but wreckage. My kitchen lay in splinters, the cherry tree in the yard was ripped from the ground, photo albums and wedding pictures lay soaked in mud, and even Maggie, my old dog, had vanished into the chaos. Later, when the insurance adjuster came, he spoke with the indifference of a man ordering lunch. ACV, he said flatly. Actual cash value. You'll get maybe a few tens of thousands. That amount wouldn't buy me a modest apartment, let alone a home to rebuild a life in. With nowhere else to turn, I drove an hour and a half to Kansas City, clinging to hope that my son Ryan would open his door. He and his girlfriend, Lila Cruz, lived in a loft that looked like it belonged in a magazine, polished, white, pristine. For a fleeting moment, I believed family would not fail me. But sitting stiffly on their immaculate sofa, I heard the words that cut deeper than the storm. Mom, Lila and I need our privacy. The HOA doesn't allow guests long-term. An extended stay would be better. Lila smiled politely, her hand resting on Ryan's arm as if to seal the decision. I walked out with my garbage bags of clothes still damp with storm water, feeling smaller than I ever had. That night, I slept in my car in the Walmart parking lot, the distant wail of a train and the sweep of a guard's flashlight reminding me just how far I had fallen. But the cruelest twist was yet to come. Checking an old email account on my phone, I found a message buried in spam. The insurance company had changed my policy months ago, stripping away nearly all my coverage. I had been left with nothing from the start, sitting in the dark. I clutched the silver hair clip I'd carried since I was 17, the last remnant of a love I had once believed eternal. Only one thought flickered through my mind. Calling Ethan Mercer, the boy who had once promised me forever. For 3 nights, Elaine lived out of her car, parking in different lots to avoid notice, keeping her eyes down whenever a security guard passed. At dawn, she slipped into the McDonald's restroom to wash her face, the fluorescent light harsh against the exhaustion carved into her features. Each time her fingers brushed the silver hair clip tucked safely in her bag, memories surged back. Ethan at 17, his hand warm around hers, whispering someday. That promise had never come true. Until now, on the 4th morning, desperation finally overpowered pride. Her hands trembled as she dialed the old number. She expected a deadline, or worse, a stranger. Instead, a voice, deep, steady, unmistakably familiar, answered. Ethan Mercer. He was no longer the boy from the wheat fields, but the CEO of Mercer Wind, a company that dotted the Midwest with turbines. Before she could explain, he cut in with urgency. Stay where you are. I'm coming. 2 hours later, a silver Lexus eased into the McDonald's lot. From behind the wheel stepped a broad-shouldered man, hair streaked with silver, eyes still the storm gray that had haunted her for decades. Elaine broke down, sobs tearing through her chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her like he'd been waiting half a lifetime. You haven't changed where it matters, he whispered. In that embrace, the years seemed to collapse, leaving only two people who had once promised forever. He drove her to his lake house in Lawrence, a sprawling home of stone and timber that felt both elegant and lived in. Books lined the shelves, small models of wind turbines filled corners, and on a worn leather chair, the same one he had owned since college, Ethan smiled at her as if no time had passed. The warmth of the place stood in stark contrast to the sterile loft Ryan had banished her from. That night, over a simple dinner Ethan cooked himself, he confessed a wound he had carried for 50 years. In 1976, before leaving for Nebraska, he had sent her a letter and an engagement ring, but her father had intercepted it, returning the ring and hiding the words, believing she had rejected him. Ethan walked away, his heart closed but never healed. He had never married. I kept waiting for an answer that never came, he said softly. A few days later, as Elaine sorted through what remained of her father's belongings, she discovered an old wooden trunk. Inside lay a faded Polaroid, and on the back, in Ethan's hand, a single word, someday. Her chest tightened, then lifted with a strange light. That love had never truly died. It had only been buried beneath secrets. Now the truth had surfaced, and at last, someday, had arrived. The first days at the lake house in Lawrence felt like breathing again. Elaine found a rhythm she thought she had lost forever. Mornings spent on the porch with a book in her lap. Afternoons wandering the reed-lined paths while the wind whispered through the stalks. Evenings at the table with Ethan as they traded stories that reached back decades. He listened with patience, never rushing her, absorbing every detail about her years behind the counter at the department store and the hollow quiet that had followed her husband's death. But peace, as always, proved fragile. One late afternoon, her phone rang. Ryan's voice was polished, formal, so measured it sounded rehearsed. "Mom, you should come stay with me. I'll take care of everything, as long as you sign a few papers so I can manage the insurance and relief funds on your behalf." Uneasy, Elaine agreed to meet him and Lila at a cafe downtown. She arrived to find Ryan already seated, a neat folder on the table in front of him. His smile stretched thin. "Just paperwork," he said, sliding it across. "This way I can handle things for you." She flipped through the pages. The fine print struck like a blade. Durable power of attorney, granting him total control of her finances. Quitclaim deed, the transfer of her land and emporia. Her chest constricted. She met his eyes, steady but trembling inside. "Do you want to take care of me, Ryan, or take everything I have left?" He forced a chuckle, his tone soothing but hollow. "Mom, don't worry. I just want you to feel secure. You shouldn't have to carry any burden." Elaine closed the folder and pushed it back, her expression cold and clear. "No, I can still read. And I still know who truly stands by me." Lila's hand slid onto Ryan's shoulder, her eyes glittering with something sharp, part anger, part calculation. Around them the cafe buzzed with chatter, yet for Elaine the room shrank to a suffocating triangle of betrayal. That night, she carried the folder back to Ethan. He read each page with lawyerly focus, his brow tightening as he reached the last line. Finally, he looked up, his voice slow, deliberate. "If you had signed this, you'd have handed them not just the insurance money, but your land, even your medical decisions. Your life would no longer be yours." Elaine's breath caught. Suddenly, the memory of Ryan's earlier refusal burned with new clarity. It had never been about privacy. It had been about profit. And the moment he saw Ethan at her side, he came running, not with love, but with hunger. For the first time in years, Elaine felt her own gaze harden with resolve. She would never again surrender her choices. Her life, bruised and battered, still belonged to her, and she intended to keep it that way. After the bitter meeting at the cafe, Elaine returned to the lake house with a heaviness that no rest could ease. When she recounted the encounter to Ethan, he listened in silence, then spoke with quiet steel. "They don't see you as a person anymore. To them, you're nothing but an asset." Determined not to let the sting of those words consume her, Elaine threw herself into small, grounding routines, preparing simple meals for Ethan, planting a row of sunflowers on the bare patch of earth near the shore, writing in her journal as she looked out across the still lake. For a few days, that fragile peace held. Then one morning, a sharp knock shattered the calm. On the porch stood a woman in a tailored suit, her expression grave, a thick folder clutched against her chest. "Miss Trent, Adult Protective Services." Her voice was clipped and official. "Mrs. D. Porter, we've received a report alleging that you are being financially exploited and controlled." Elaine felt her body go cold, her hands trembling. Ethan, steady as ever, invited Miss Trent inside and immediately phoned their attorney, a T. Branch. As they waited, the questions began, about bank accounts, assets, the reasons she was living here with Ethan. Elaine answered honestly, her voice wavering as she described the night her son turned her away and the days she spent sleeping in her car before calling Ethan. Beside her, Ethan calmly laid out documents showing that not a single cent had been transferred from her to him. The atmosphere grew suffocating, each word weighed like a judgment. Finally, Miss Trent closed the folder and remarked, almost in passing, "The report was unusually detailed, especially about your insurance claim, information only someone inside the industry would know." Elaine's heart lurched. Ryan worked in insurance. Lila, though in marketing, often boasted of her industry contacts. The truth was undeniable. The accusation had not come from strangers. It had come from her own family. She sat frozen, her breath shallow, her world spinning again as if the tornado had returned to tear through what little she had rebuilt. Under the table, Ethan's hand slid over hers, firm and unwavering. When she met his eyes, she saw no doubt, no fear, only a promise that she would not face this battle alone. Ethan refused to let suspicion linger in the shadows. He reached out to an old friend at the bank and leaned on a whistleblower inside the insurance company. The findings chilled Elaine to the bone. An internal account had tampered with her file, altering her contact details at the exact hour Ryan had phoned APS. The betrayal was no longer imagined. It was carved into digital proof. That evening, Ethan decided to confront the truth head-on. He invited Ryan and Lila to a family-style dinner at the lake house. Under the glow of warm lights, a pot of beef stew simmered. Cornbread fresh from the oven filled the room with homely scents. Yet beneath the gentle trappings of comfort, the air was heavy, each breath charged with tension. Elaine's hands trembled as she placed dishes on the table, her heart pounding with dread. Ryan launched into conversation with his polished charm, painting pictures of new opportunities and synergy between his insurance firm and Mercer Wind. His words flowed smooth, like a salesman rehearsing a pitch. Lila nodded along, her smile bright but brittle, her eyes darting nervously around the room as if searching for escape. Ethan waited, silent and impassive. When Ryan finally paused, Ethan placed a folder on the table with deliberate calm. "Audit log," he said evenly. "It shows your company's internal account accessed Elaine's insurance file and made unauthorized changes." The room froze. Elaine felt her chest tighten as she caught Lila slipping her phone under the table, recording in secret. Ryan's face flushed crimson. He forced a laugh that fell flat. "This must be a mistake," he stammered. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and sharp enough to cut glass. "If it were a mistake, why does the log match the exact time you called APS? There's no glitch here, only intent." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elaine sat motionless, her heart splintering. The tornado had taken her home, but this, her own son's treachery, struck far deeper. Ryan stared at the table, speechless. Lila turned her face away, feigning ignorance. Beneath the table, Ethan reached for Elaine's hand. His grip was firm, steady, carrying a vow unspoken. She would never face their cruelty alone again. The night after the tense dinner, Elaine sat by the window, her body aching with exhaustion. The lake lay still, reflecting a pale moon, but inside her chest the waters churned. Ethan's hand rested gently on her shoulder, a wordless reassurance. yet she knew the trial was far from over. A week later, an envelope from the insurance company arrived. The payout was final, a meager sum, barely enough to buy a rusty trailer. Elaine's hands shook as she held the paper, the bitter taste of defeat rising in her throat. It felt like another storm had ripped through her life, erasing hope of stability once again. That afternoon, Ryan appeared at the lake house. He wore his workday polish, brisk and confident, but his smile was too smooth. "Mom, you should take the money. Sell the Emporia land while it's worth something. I know a developer buying up properties after the storm. This is your golden opportunity. Let me handle the details." Elaine stared at the paper, unable to speak. Ethan stepped in from the hallway, his presence grounding the room like stone. His voice was sharp and cold. "That developer isn't here to help. They're the same people who betrayed Mercer Wind, left debt and broken promises behind. They're not building safety, they're chasing profit. I'll be bidding against them, to keep the land for its people." Ryan's face darkened, anger flushing across his cheeks. "You're stealing my chance. Mom, can't you see? He doesn't care about you. He just wants your land to grow his empire." Elaine lifted her eyes to meet her son's. For the first time, she saw clearly, behind the charm and the excuses, burned a greed fiercer than love. Pain split her chest, but beneath it lay something stronger, a quiet, rising storm within her. She had already lost her home to one tornado. She would not surrender herself to another. The conference room at the local bank felt smaller than it was, the air heavy with judgment. Elaine sat stiff in her chair, palms damp against her lap, her heart thudding so loudly she thought the others might hear it. To her right, a TOF branch organized his files. To her left, Miss Trent from APS folded her hands tightly. Across the table, Ryan leaned back with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, while Lila avoided every glance, staring down at her shoes as though wishing she could disappear. Branch's voice broke the silence. "We have evidence," he said, switching on the projector. The audit log filled the screen, line after line, marking Ryan's account tampering with his mother's file. The next slide exposed Lila's messages. "Get the deed. Make sure she signs." Elaine's breath caught, her throat closing as she looked at her son, who lowered his gaze to the table. Lila pressed her lips so tightly they turned white, her whole body shrinking into the chair. The outcome came swiftly. Ryan was formally disciplined by his company, the breach undeniable. Lila rose quietly, leaving the room without a word, her footsteps echoing like an admission of guilt. APS announced the case closed. Not only was Elaine never exploited, but she had been threatened by her own family. The words hit harder than any gavel, final and cold. In that moment, Ethan stood. He clasped Elaine's trembling hand, lifting it with quiet conviction. "Elaine is not a burden," he declared, his voice steady. "She is the center of my life. I will protect her with my heart and with my strength." What followed was not just justice, but renewal. Ethan launched the Prairie Rebuild Fund, rallying churches and neighbors to reinforce roofs, install no-way radios, and dig safe storm shelters. Elaine kept her Emporia land, transforming it into a community garden with a model shelter at its heart. One morning, as volunteers cleared debris, a bark broke the air. From the weeds stumbled Maggie, caked in mud, ribs sharp, but eyes bright with life. Elaine dropped to her knees, tears spilling as she held the trembling dog close. For the first time since the tornado, she felt whole again. October cast Kansas in a soft, golden haze, the air carrying both chill and promise. By the lake, lanterns swayed gently, and the sound of chimes mingled with quiet laughter. The wedding was small, stripped of grandeur, yet it carried the weight of survival and the sweetness of love that had waited half a lifetime. Neighbors, friends, and those who had stood by through every storm gathered close, their presence a reminder that true wealth is measured in loyalty. When the ceremony ended, reconciliation arrived in hesitant steps. A late figure lingered at the edge of the gathering, voice low and worn with regret. The exchange that followed was neither triumphant nor bitter. It was simple, an acknowledgement of wrongs and the fragile possibility of starting again. Boundaries would remain, but love, though wounded, was not erased. As evening fell, the lake reflected the warm glow of lanterns and the steady beat of a future reclaimed. On the fields of Emporia, sunflowers swayed where wreckage had once stood, their golden heads turned to the wind. The storm had taken much, but it had not destroyed the will to rise. Renewal, at last, had become home.